Hello, everybody, and welcome to the I Am 1-2 podcast with your host, Christopher Cohn. I'm here always with my good friend and co-pilot and producer, Dan the Man. Say hello, Dan.
How's everybody doing out there?
Hell yeah. Welcome back. We are so glad to hear from you, see you, have you part of this family, and keep coming, keep joining. Let us keep learning more on this road of recovery so we can have the best life ever, because all of us are living in this matrix of weird, unhealthy, prescribed programs, strange behaviors, and we don't seem to know how to get out of it. But I promise you, there is another way to live, and these tools can help you find your way out, no matter who you are. You don't have to be addict or alcoholic to use these tools. We actually have a question later during our question portion that addresses that. Who are the 12 steps for? Well, how does it work in other programs? And I will try to address that for you later on. So if you're just joining us in this podcast, we like to talk about all things recovery, how to have a better life, how to become the best version of yourself, how to deal with our addicted landscape of dopamine drip that's available everywhere you turn. I've got a Krispy Kreme over here. I got a cigarette dealer over here. I got a CBD oil place over there. I've got a McDonald's over here, and I can just make myself really sick on everything. I got Caesars to go gamble over here. I've got the porn palace over here, and it's just, we have gotten to a place as a culture where we are confusing pleasure with satisfaction. And you cannot derive full satisfaction and feel that you've lived a life worth living just from feeding yourself Netflix and Cheetos and porn and whatever else you're putting down your gullet, thinking that that's going to make you happy. It doesn't work. But we've been sold that in our society. You're unhappy, buy something. If you're not feeling good about yourself, drink something, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to challenge all that on this podcast. We welcome you all to be a part of it. We do have a question and answer period at the end of the podcast. So if you would like to drop us a line and or ask us any question anonymously, we will not identify you, and we're happy to address any area to help you deal with life, relationships, navigating your family system, your history, trauma, whatever it is. Please drop us a line. Send that to iam12recovery, the word recovery, at gmail.com. That's iam12recovery@gmail.com. All right. The way the program is structured, again, if you're just joining us, I'm a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. I've had over 20 years of field experience as a professional. I've also got 40 years recovery, and I've been honored to sponsor and help a lot of people on this journey, and I want to bring some of that experience. I've had some of the best teachers in the world. Anybody that compliments me, like I just had my 40-year celebration, and I had people coming out of the woodwork. I hope everybody out there could experience this. My phone almost self-destructed for how much it blew up on Saturday. I lost track of how many texts and polos and phone calls that I had to return and thank the person. And it was about 11:25 at night when I was answering the last text before I went to bed. So I hope all of you all can have that experience and have that kind of fellowship around you. I know that if I need anything or if I'm ever in trouble, I'm safe and protected because I have a family around me, unlike anything I've ever had in my life before. So, but what I was saying is whenever I get those compliments, I'm extremely humbled because it's not about me. This is about this program. It's about these tools. It's about a higher power, and it's about all these great teachers that have come through my path. And I want to be able to be honored in the role for you, and as part of this podcast, to be a teacher for you, to help you unwind the mystery of what's happened to your life, because it has been hijacked, and this is not the life you signed up for. We have a saying in our program here in town where we do the 12 steps for everybody, where we say, life was not supposed to be like this. My life was not supposed to be like this. So if you're not happy in your job or your relationship, there's better ways, and we hope to be able to help you with that. I've got so many great teachers that have crossed my path, and we've lost that in our culture. We used to have that when we lived in tribes. There was always an elder or a group of shaman or somebody that was going to teach you how to navigate the world to its best ability so you could be successful and happy. And now we just give our kids a tablet and say, figure it out. This isn't working clearly. They're shooting each other. So welcome to the podcast. I hope you'll get something out of it. And as always, like and subscribe so we can continue to spread the message to others. If we don't raise our analytics, we will go into the YouTube obscurity, and we can do all this effort, and people that really need to hear this who don't have access to treatment centers will never get help. So consider it service work if you would do us that favor to like and subscribe, not for us, but so we can get other people to hear this podcast.
And share it with your friends.
Share it with your, thank you. I hadn't thought about that one. See, that's why Dan is my producer. Dan is also working on shorts for TikTok and for YouTube shorts. So look for us out there as you're scrolling. If you get some recovery feed on your analytics, on your on your algorithm. Maybe it'll come up in your as your.
That's exactly how it works. If people are watching it, people are commenting, people are liking, then YouTube will say, well, if this many people like it, maybe more people, and they'll put it in people's suggested things. And then that's the way you get. But if like nobody's, let's just say the opposite. Let's say you got a podcast or a show and everybody opens it for 5 minutes and closes it and they don't go back to it. Well, YouTube's going to say that show must suck. So nobody likes it. We won't promote it. So all the activity, commenting, liking, sharing, all that stuff.
Even
YouTube knows.
Even watching the whole episode.
And watching the whole episode. It also, that's big time. The YouTube analytics will tell you if people shut it off in the first 5 or 10 minutes, or if they watched half of it, or if they watched it to completion. And it's amazing. It is the epitome of this privacy thing we were talking about, because they know exactly how much YouTube you are watching, regardless if you have a subscription or signed in or not. And I know a lot of people don't have an account in YouTube, and that's why they can't like comment and subscribe and do that, because you have to have an account to be able to do that. But they still know how much you're watching as an anonymous person, regardless if you have an account or not.
And to find us, since we're buried underneath content of other people right now, I experienced, if you go to YouTube and just Google I Am 1-2, it does not come up right away. If you Google I Am 1-2 podcast, then it comes up on YouTube almost immediately. Also, we are available as a podcast on Spotify, and we're working on Apple.
Apple's too. It's on.
It's on there now?
Yeah,
excellent.
It's loading up there.
And what else? Pandora?
I don't have it on any other ones right now, because
Okay.
my experience with the Spiritual Underground podcast, people only listen to Spotify and Apple.
Okay, good.
So
makes it easier.
Yep.
So what we're saying about that is that's a totally different analytic. So you can try and get that up as well if you want to listen in your car and not have to watch a video or anything like that. We're trying to make it available to as many people as possible. Also, if you're Googling that, I believe, Producer Dan, it's I Am 1-2 also.
You're correct.
ALSO. Someone else had the copyright on I Am 1-2, if you call it that. So we are I Am 1-2 also, if you're looking for the podcast on Spotify or Apple. All right, let's get right into today's topic. The way we format this show is I'm going to run some edumacation past you, one of those topics that I usually do for my patients. I'll give you some experience, strength, and hope, some science. And then after that, I'll have Dan the Man chime in on his experience and any questions that came up for him as he was hearing us good stuff. And we have a good dialogue back and forth. And then we like to do our question and answer period. So as we say, send us material so we can help you. Even if you've written in before, folks, please help us. We need material.
Somebody else has your question too, so you're not just helping yourself. Somebody else has the same kind of problem, and they'll have their question answered in there.
You know what? And maybe it's a question on something you've already conquered in your life, but maybe someone else hasn't. So you can say, well, this is what I did. What do you think? So we'd love to hear that as well. We'd love to hear if people have ideas that worked. I don't want to be the guy here with all the answers, because I'm definitely not. So, all right. So let's get to the real topic today. This is like one of those heavy duties that's bomb in the room. We're going to talk about step 3 and the God stuff. Now, this is a euphemism in the program for all that stuff. When people hear the word G-O-D, they all flip out and run out the exits, and they're very confused about what that means. They're so confused. If you look up as a religious, you're going to be overwhelmed about the number of people who are confused about this point. So I'll hopefully clear that up for you about the 12-step spirituality, which has nothing to do with religion unless you choose to have that as part of your spirituality. But it's up to you to decide that for yourself. Everybody gets to have their own belief, and that's not true in church. They're going to tell you what to believe. And if you don't believe the way they believe, they're going to invite you out the door to some other church. So that is not what we do in the program. We all have you can go to any group in the world. I don't care if it's France, Japan, whoever, and you can say 50 people in the room, what's your idea of a higher power? What's your idea of spirituality? And they're all going to have a different take on it. Now, what's cool about this approach, and y'all need to hear this, none of us are fighting over it. There's no wars, there's no nuclear threats, there's no famines, and there's no holocausts. There's none of that shit. And most of the woes of men and women fighting against each other since the human race started has been over religion. We don't have that with spirituality. Interesting thing. In fact, I like to learn and hear from other people. I'm not threatened by hearing what their spirituality is. I can learn from that. and that enriches my spirituality. Same kind of deal with minorities. It's so silly. It's like, well, minorities bring different tastes and different experiences that I can use in my life to enrich my experiences, which might be kind of boring because I'm just part of one race. So open our mind. That's the first part of step 3. You've got to have an open mind about this. So let's go back to the beginning. Like I say, I always give you some reference points of where we started with all this and what it all means. I had a brilliant teacher in my beginnings, one of the greatest counselors I've ever known. And he told me this story that imagine you're a cave person and you're starving and you don't know what to do. You've got this bow and arrow and you spot this hare and you've been chasing this rabbit for days and miles. And each time you go to shoot at it, it just escapes the arrow and runs away. And it's the only sign of any food in sight. If you don't go after that, there's probably nothing. You're just going to have to lay down and die. And you're literally starving. Your stomach is caving in on itself. And by chance, you happen to shoot that arrow at it one last time when you're about to fall over, and it gets it. And it kills the rabbit instantly. You run over to it. And the cave guy takes it into his mouth and he chews on it without even removing the fur. He's so starving. He just needs to get that sustenance in as soon as possible, even if it's just the blood, to get something in his body to not die. At the very moment that he has that dopamine hit from the sustenance hitting his body, and you will see this every week on the show Naked and Afraid. You will see this on the show Survivor when they're starving and they get to win a challenge and they get food. That moment when they go, oh, like they're coming back to life. Imagine the cave person has that moment, and then when he looks up, he just happens to see this beautiful sunset. And out of nowhere, from the honesty of his heart, comes a genuine and heartfelt thank you. That's known as spirituality. It has nothing to do with dogma, approaches, institutions, buildings, books. It's yours. It's personal. And you cannot, I will argue this with anyone, deny that the human animal has a spiritual side, even if you don't believe in any kind of faith, or you're going to sit there and argue you're an agnostic or an atheist. I certainly thought I was. But I can argue a couple of points on that. Number one, you're going to have faith in something. Maybe your faith is the bourbon collection you have is going to satisfy that itch. That if you need a drink at the end of the night, that bourbon's already going to hit the spot. Then that's going to be your little belief. That's going to be your spirituality, okay? Or maybe you believe that my kids, the most important thing in the world to me, if I were to lose them, I don't know what I would do. Then you have some faith in that. But the real argument we use is like with our alcoholics, we'll say, well, did you ever have the experience where you were driving home one night and there's nobody on the road, but you were drunk as hell and you don't even know how you're keeping it between the lines and you're praying just to get home and you don't even know what you're talking to. And all of a sudden this car goes by in the other lane and it makes a U-E. And you're looking in your rear view and you're watching these lights come up you and you're stuck at the stoplight and you're asking that stoplight to change, please change, please change, please change. And then you change that to, please don't be a cop, please don't be a cop. And then you glimpse one more time and you see a little bulb on top and you think, oh my God, that's a police light. Oh my God, please don't pull me over, please don't. Question is, who are you talking to? Are you schizophrenic? Were you talking to yourself? Who were you talking to? My argument, and if you notice human behavior, the foxhole atheist, it happens every time. When the shit's hitting the fan, you will reach out for something. And I've had neuroscientists point out it's almost as if we're programmed for the idea of a higher being or a God or whatever you want to call it. I think we get too caught up in words, and that's what prejudices us, because we've been programmed that these words mean something from our youth, and maybe we don't like the definition of what we learned. But there is something that when the car's going off the cliff and I've lost control and I'm facing... We just had a Amazon driver where someone switched the lane and ran him off on the bridge downtown, and they just showed the interior camera of this poor woman trying to get the truck under control as she's headed over the bridge. And at the last second, her cab got caught on the edge of the bridge, and she's hanging over, and she won't even look, and she's screaming for help. Because she's facing certain death. And you're going to sit there and argue. She's going to reach out for help. Of course she is. It is not natural for a human animal to say, no, I got this. I'm good. I don't need any help. I'm okay. So, Open your mind to that. And it has to be about spirituality. We're not talking about religion. And spirituality is very personal and deep and meaningful to you. It's yours alone. It's not somebody else's version. It cannot be taught to you. It's my argument that we're born with it. And Carl Jung believed that, and it separated him from Freud. Sigmund Freud, he was the teacher. Carl Jung was the student. And Carl Jung argued that man had a soul, a spiritual side. You couldn't argue that. And Sigmund Freud had nothing to do with it. So who won out? Well, now Carl Jung is considered the father of modern psychology, psychiatry, whatever way you want to put it. So we have to open our ideas that what we're talking about in this program is spirituality. Okay. Now, where does that come from? Why do we even need spirituality to recover? Why can't I just recover with the help of my friends and a few tools? Well, it's a little more complicated than that, especially when we're dealing with addiction. Addiction is a very powerful force, and the program says, like we said in our last episode, step 2, I'm going to need a power greater than myself. I need something that has enough depth and weight that when the real stuff's hitting the fan and I'm going down with the ship and I'm about to go to the liquor store, I'm going to need something to hang on to by its bootstraps and cling to and say, please, 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 please get me out of this. Okay. So where does that come from in the origins of AA? Well, Bill Wilson was 12-stepped. He didn't know what that meant. We didn't have any program, but he had a friend of his named Ebby Thatcher who came over to talk to him. And Ebby knew that Bill was dying. And Ebby went on this mercy mission. I won't tell the full story today, but he basically was trying to say, look, I found this thing that's working. I've been sober for 6 months. And as soon as he mentioned that it's a religious thing, because he didn't know what else to call it, this was the 1930s. So he said, I got religion. And Bill immediately went, oh, no, we can't have that. And he started making fun of it and he started putting them down. But what worked and changed history is Ebby wasn't having any of that. Ebby was his best friend. And you know the way you talk to your best friend when they're being a dick? That's what he did to Bill. He said, Bill, I really don't appreciate you taking a crap. I'm the only thing that's saving my life. And then he went on to tell Bill, you know, you had Lois to pull you out of the gutter and make sure you didn't freeze to death on the streets of New York. I was out there alone, and I was worse than you. And now I'm telling you, I'm sober for 6 months, and this thing is really working. Now, what he had done is he had gone to this group called the Oxford Group, and it was a split off of churches. And they had this thing called the 4 absolutes: absolute love, absolute honesty, absolute tolerance. And it was these very ideal principles that were set pretty high, that if you follow these principles, something changes in your heart and you actually start having a better life, as long as you're putting these into action. He also told Bill, strange thing about our group, you get to pick your own conception of a higher power. I believe this is a revolutionary shift in the history of mankind that we're still seeing unfold. I need you all to understand this. Ever since the dawn of time, when religions and institutions came in with men and women, mostly men back in the day, let's face facts, and they said, we can use that spirituality of the caveman, let us take possession of that. Now you people need to come to us, and you need to tithe and give us certain kinds of monies, and you need to listen to the way we see it and listen to our agenda, and then only then you get to be worthy of having a higher power in your life. They stole it, in other words. And by the way, when we talk about the word recovery, and you look up in the dictionary, to go back and reclaim that which has been lost, or as Dan the Man added, or stolen, that's what's happened to all of us. Our idea of an original concept that I have something that cares about me, and it's the force that created me, so therefore it may be my parent. I'll get to that in a second. They've stolen that from me, and now I need to go to a building and let this person tell me when it's okay to share with it and how I'm supposed to share with it and how I'm supposed to dress and everything else I'm supposed to do. Absolute insanity. So spirituality is what the program's all about, not religion. And still Bill was like, I don't know about this, but still that concept about something that's greater than you, but you get to choose your own conception. He'd never heard anybody say that before. This was the 1930s. We didn't have all kinds of deep thinking stuff back then. People were told this is the way it is, and if you don't believe, it's the works of the devil. So he pondered on that. He went to a few groups. He got sober. And he got sober mostly through the help of his doctor, Dr. Silkworth, and also going out and helping drunks out in the Bowery of New York. He would go out there every night with his wife, Lois. This is documented in the movie, When Love Is Not Enough, with Winona Ryder. And she's sitting on the stoop over there while he's over there trying to talk to the drunks, and they're just laughing at him. And he gets so frustrated. He's like, this isn't working. I can't get anybody to get sober. And she said, Bill, you're sober. You trying to help them is keeping you sober. Don't miss the point. So service work was another element that he learned about. But that's all they knew, folks. And to them, spirituality was religion. These were Judeo-Christian men. The founders of AA, that was their background. Had they been Jewish, mostly, or had they been Buddhist, we might be praying to a different higher power or doing different prayers. But when people question, well, if this isn't religious, why do they say the Our Father? It's just a tradition. It doesn't have to be like that in your home group if you decide you just want to do the Serenity Prayer at the end of the group, which is not a prayer. It comes from a poem. So you can switch up your own group any way you want to do it. You don't have to adhere to what the other people do it. But I don't know. I didn't like it either when I came in. I'll explain that in a minute. But it is a tradition that that was what they knew. They also knew that they needed to call it something, and it had to be non-denominational. They couldn't say, come in here and Jesus will fix you, or or Muhammad will fix you. They said God, and that's a non-denominational term. Unfortunately, it has all this baggage, which I'm going to explain, but that's where we started from. That's where they're starting from. Interestingly enough, when he went to Dr. Bob in Ohio at 6 months recovery, and he needed to talk to another drunk or he was going to get drunk, and he miraculously found this guy, Dr. Bob, who didn't want to listen to him, Dr. Bob had already been to the Oxford group. And surprisingly, the Oxford group had not sobered Dr. Bob up. And I've been told, and the history says, what sobered Dr. Bob up was the medical opinion. Bill presented everything that Dr. Silkworth talked to him, and Dr. Bob was like, wait a minute, I'm a freaking doctor, and I missed all this. He was stunned at how much it was in his face, and he had missed that he had been sick. But that's what we're starting with when people are like, well, why do they talk about God? And why are they saying that, all these fancy phrases in the big book? Well, the fact was Bill was listening to Emmett Fox and reading his books, and they all went to see him speak at Carnegie Hall. You'll see lines in the big book like divine intelligence or spirit of the universe. That's from a teacher named Emmett Fox back in the day who taught scientific Christianity, which is the background of what these Bible phrases really mean. Just one example, if you're talking about life in the Bible, he'll use an analogy, Jesus will, like water in a desert. Because that's literally what it is. If you live in a desert, which is where they lived, if you didn't have water, you died. So he's making an analogy to use that. And if you miss the analogies and take it literal, you don't get the lesson of what they were trying to teach you. So that's where Bill and the boys started from. So here comes me into this program. And like everybody else, I'm looking at these 12 steps on the wall, and I see that word God. And all I got to do is look at my friend Dan, because I'm sure he had the same reaction. And I was like, oh, here we go. Break out the tambourines, and they're going to shave my head and serve communion, and we're going to talk to Jesus, and we are going to get sober and saintly. And I had no clue what they were talking about. Now, why did I react that way? Well, this is where I hope it helps you immensely to learn. You have been receiving everyone else's idea about what a higher power is since you've been in the womb. There is some very interesting scientific evidence about what is in the environment around the mother as they're carrying the child also affects the fetus. So even before I was born, I was absorbing my family's particular programming about this is the way we do it. This is what our traditions are. We go to this particular church, and this is what we believe, and you must adhere to our way of looking at it, because if you don't belong in the family. That's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. Doesn't even give them a fair chance to develop their own concepts. Now, here's what's really interesting. If you talk to any kid about God, they've already got their own concepts. They don't need to be taught it. We teach our kids a lot of effed up stuff, like racism and how to think you're better than somebody else because you have more money. Kids don't think that when they're young. They don't have any of that stuff. So we take this little kid and teach him about hell. My old spiritual teacher would say, that's a hell of a thing to teach a child, that you're going to hell because you messed up, because your parents that mad at you. So I had a patient who didn't believe me on this, but they took me at my word. I said, look, go ask your child if they're under 5 years old what God is, and prepare to be astonished at what comes out of their mouth. So my patient comes back the next day, and she was all excited. She's like, oh my God, I did it. I'm like, what'd you do? She goes, well, I picked up my little girl from school yesterday. She's 4.5, and she's in the back seat. She's just humming to herself, and I'm driving. And I said, honey, and she goes, yeah, mommy. I said, so I'm just curious. What do you think about God? And the little kid went off. The little kid was like, oh my God, God's like great. God gives us puppies and rainbows and merry-go-rounds and cotton candy. And she kept going, and she kept going, and literally she was going so long. The mother, who was a hardcore opiate user, just had to pull over. She was breaking down because it was just overwhelming. All the positive things that came out of this beautiful child's mouth about its own parent creator. Nothing to do with being damned, nothing to do with judgment, nothing to do with hell. Had not learned those concepts yet. What a beautiful thing that we had to go in there and steal and ruin for that poor little child who probably would have been pretty well adjusted with her original concept about with what a higher power was supposed to be. So that's kind of what we're trying to get to when we challenge our spiritual beliefs in the program and do what's called a God inventory. Hold on to that thought. We'll get to that in a minute. But so I said, I come in here and I look at these steps and I see that God word, and I brings up immediately all the things I didn't like that I was growing up with. Okay. My idea of a higher power that I was taught was it's very strict. If you don't follow these rules, you are unworthy and you will not deserve to go into heaven. You will be a sinner. You will be outcast. You should feel ashamed. You should feel guilt. That's the things I learned from my church. Now, my mother and other people in my family, they went to the same church and they heard beautiful things. They heard hope and joy and angels and great stories. I didn't hear any of that. I heard guilt and shame and I'm unworthy. And I was already feeling that way as an alcoholic. So that was not working for me for a workable spirituality to stay sober. But like a computer, that's all we can do. Your brain will constantly bring up a reference point for everything you encounter. It has to do that to make sense of the world. I'm looking at my water jug right now, and because I have a neuron in my brain that knows what a water jug is, I've seen it before, I don't have to look at it twice and go, what the hell is that? I know what a candle is. And I'm like, oh, look at the candle. What is this? That's the way the brain works. You can't help it. So I see that word G-O-D, and my brain goes... Remember those old teletype computers that just would just keep going, all these definitions? You've got all of that in your head. And clearly it doesn't work for you by the time you reach the program, because if it did, you wouldn't be in the program. People that have good spirituality don't tend to have the problems that we have. I don't see the Dalai Lama going to jail. I don't see the Dalai Lama running into trouble with his partner or with his family or hurting people. Okay? So people will come into my group and say, but I believe in God. And I say, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about belief. We're talking about a relationship. We're talking about a connection with a power that you trust so much that you will actually allow it to have all of your money, your kids' lives, your home, every possession you care about, and trust that it will take care of it. Now, that's a long road to get there, but where we start is just by being open-minded at the beginning. So, as I said, all that baggage came up for me, and I was so antipathy or whatever it's called. I was so antagonistic about the term. I didn't say Our Father for the first year in my home group. So I don't know if y'all want to sit here and tell me, you understand, Christopher, I don't believe in any of that shit. You understand. I fought the power. Fight the powers, man. And I did not say that prayer for the first year. I was in a home group that was so damn cool, and that's why I chose it for my home group, the Polaris group up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that not one old-timer came and corrected me. And I would challenge other old-timers out there to use that example. Let them have their journey. Don't come over and say, oh, you're supposed to say the prayer. No, they don't have to say the prayer if they don't want to. And I didn't think it was right. I thought religion had nothing to do in this program where I'm trying to save my life. I didn't understand about the tradition and all that stuff, okay? And I didn't even know it was optional. But yes, it is. You can choose to say a different prayer to end your meeting on. It's up to you, whatever you like. So I was having such a hard time with it that I was running into it like a wall. I get to step 3. They're asking me to turn everything over to this power. That's what step 3 says. Made a decision. I'm going to turn my life and my will, wait a minute, what? to this power greater than myself as I understand it, right? God of my own understanding. And I'm like, that still doesn't sound like a good deal. I can't trust it anymore, and I could trust my own family with my stuff. So I'm hitting this wall, and I'm hitting this wall, and I'm hitting this wall, and we're reading the big book, and my sponsor pointed out to me and says, Bill's talking about you right here. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, unfortunately, and this is what I see, you can go to any meeting in the world, and you're going to hear an old-timer stand up and say, Bill says in the book, deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. That is a 100% worthless piece of crap statement that doesn't mean anything to help your newcomer. Please hear me, old guys. You got to give them the second sentence that Bill says, otherwise that first part makes no sense at all. So deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God, but then Bill says, but it might be blocked. And this is how brilliant this guy was. This is how much of a higher power came through him to write this revolutionary text. It might be blocked by calamity, pomp, or worship of other things. Again, fancy phrases like irritable, restless, discontent, nobody explained them to me. But if my sponsor had said to me, Calamity, he's talking about your dad being a drunk. You told me your argument against God is that you were told by this church you were in, and I went to elementary school there too, that if you pray for your father, Jesus will save him, and that's the best thing you can do, pray for him to get saved from his drinking. And he didn't. And he got worse. And our family was torn to ribbons. And he died. So what did that convince me? There ain't no damn higher power. There's nothing out there going to help me. That's a bunch of bullshit. And most of my people I work with, all of them have a block of some form that immediately comes up. Even if they're not aware of it, they'll just sort of go inside. When they heard that word God, they'll pull back. Like, I even get nervous hearing the word in the meeting nowadays. I'm like, oh, please don't take a left turn with all that. You're going to confuse the newcomer. So calamity, it might be blocked by calamity. So deep down inside of me, like you say, when I was a kid, I wanted to believe in this, that there was something there that cared about me, that actually had something had my back. And I would pray to it at night, and it was like the Easter bunny or the tooth fairy coming to leave money underneath my pillow. It's like, yeah, I'm okay with that. If it's good and it's going to help me, I want that. And then I got wrecked by this world and human beings being imperfect. And I took that stuff, and we confuse what people do to be God. You'll hear people blame that, like, well, where's the God in that guy doing that? Well, that guy has free will. God can't control that. That person's choosing to do that. There's no way a God could interfere with that. That's not the way the system is set up. If you have free will, you either got total free will or you don't. So calamity, it could be abuse. It could be trauma. It could be financial hardship as a growing up in poverty, whatever you went through, that calamity will turn you off that there's the idea of a power that will help you. Pomp, that's the intellect. I had that one too. Pomp means I got all the answers and I can out-argue you about God. I loved nothing more than to get high and argue with a person about why God does not exist, or the philosophers I had read, or all the stuff I had learned in college, which didn't serve me very well in life, but I could sure make a good talk of it, a good show of it. And that's what pomp is. It's sort of like a worship of myself. Like, well, I'm doing fine, and, I have a car, and I have a beautiful wife, and I have a nice house and a good job. So what do I need God for? I've got this, okay? That's what pomp is. I'm sort of full of myself. I don't need a higher power. And then the worship of other things is what we have as in our culture. What do we worship in America? And I bet if I say it before I say it, money. We can say in God we trust on the dollar bill, but what America worships is money and power and success. Look at all the kids nowadays that want to grow up and be a TikTok influencer or a YouTube influencer, and they think that's the way to happiness. I got to be somebody. I got to make a lot of money and follow the Kardashians and wear this designer crap on the red carpet, and somehow that makes me a worthwhile human being. That's what worship of other things is. And we worship so much. It's kind of an awakening to my patients, when I tell them, regardless if you tell me you believe in God, your real God is alcohol. And they'll say, what are you talking about? I believe in God. Dare you say that? And I'll say, well, how many hours did you spend at the bar? And how many hours did you spend praying to your higher power? Well, I wasn't praying at all at the end. Of course you weren't. Your true God was this. Whatever you give your attention to that day, whatever got most of your attention, energy, emotion, and time, that's it. That's your higher power that day. So he was breaking that down for me, and I was like, all right, I can kind of get that. I'm blocked. But how do I freaking get unblocked, man? It's almost like you're constipated. I can't get this God programming of other people's ideas is consuming me. It wasn't even my ideas. And here's my greatest argument for this being a crime against humanity. And I mean this. This is the biggest trick ever played on humanity, that they stole your personal belief to have a relationship with this power that could help you in your own life be a success and achieve everything you want to achieve. And they twisted it and made it something nasty, so now you reject it. And this is something I will never understand about any of my patients, or even my own disease, is like the very people who taught you this that you didn't like. You didn't respect them. You didn't want what they had. You hated what they said at the time they hated it, and you hate it today. But today, you know what you're doing? You're letting them and what they taught you stand in the way of you being open to something else. And then I'll tell my newcomer, there's a vast marketplace out there, man. Have you looked around? What about Hinduism? What about Zen? What about the Tao of Pooh? Yeah, I'm not talking about poo out your butt. I'm talking about Winnie the Pooh, T-A-O, Tao. The Tao of Pooh is a great book to teach you some spirituality. They're like, what? Does it have cartoons? Yeah, it's got cartoons. Check it out. And you will reject all that. And they all say it when they come in. I don't believe in that shit. I don't like that shit. It's like, well, that's what your teacher taught you. And you didn't even like that teacher. So you have a choice now. You can let them dominate the rest of your life with your resentment against them, or you can start getting healed on that resentment and chuck that person off your freaking shoulders. Move on. We don't need that energy anymore. But getting back to the point, I wanted to figure out how to get unblocked. And I've got to tell this story because I believe it's so important for people, and then we'll move on to the God inventory and start to wrap this up a bit. I had a very interesting experience happen one night. As I'm struggling with all this stuff, the closest AA meetings to me where I lived in Minneapolis at the time, and I didn't have a car for the first 3 years of my recovery. For any newcomers out there bitching about your cell phone not working, try not having a car in one of the coldest places in the United States and try to get to meetings and everything you got to do. I believe my higher power was teaching me a lot of humility in that point, and it really worked. But when I say teaching, I don't mean in a mean way. He knew that it would be good for my future ability to help others, to keep my ego in check. I always got to we all have to keep our ego in check. So I went to this meeting one night. It's at the Clubhouse 2218. It's one of the oldest clubhouses in the United States. Bill Wilson dedicated it in 1941. And I didn't know any of that. I didn't care. I just knew it was a place to go get some relief. And those people in AA in the 83 and 84, you'll hear me say this a lot. It was a very angry, scary place because it was run by angry white men who were hopped up on nicotine and caffeine, maybe some sugar cookies. And they hadn't done their own work on their own inner child or their own shit that happened to them as a kid. So they were taking it out on you if you dared to bring that up in a meeting. If you brought up your feelings or got vulnerable, they were ready to pounce on you. Well, your parents did the best job they could. Get over it. Blah, blah, blah. What are you, mad because you got weeded off the tit too early? Is that the problem? They didn't sit you right in the toilet? They just say this really abusive stuff to you. Thank God it's not like that anymore. But again, it was a reflection that they had not done their own healing work. So they're still angry, even though they're supposedly sober. There's a lot of those old timers still out there. We call them crusty old timers. Try to avoid them if you can. You can tell by their demeanor. You'll feel their energy. And you're like, that didn't feel good. I'm going to go over here. You be over there with you. Thank you for trying to help me, but I don't want what you have. So that was my attitude. And I'm going to this place. I'm like, just don't talk to me. I'm just here to do my thing. We didn't have papers back then to sign, but it was kind of like that deal. I was trying to hit a meeting every night. And they brought the God stuff, and I was over there cringing and just rolling my eyes or shaking in my seat or whatever the hell I was doing to let them know I wasn't pleased. So the meeting ended. I ended up going on the front porch to have a smoke, and this old timer was eyeballing me out of the corner of my eye here. And you know that energy you feel where somebody's about to come over, and you're like saying, don't come over here, dude. Don't come. Please, I'm just trying to be here, smoke a cigarette. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk. And I was trying to get off the porch before he came over, and before I knew it, he was in my face, and he's going, hey there, how you doing? And I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. And then I started praying not to punch him. And he was like, I saw you in a meeting there, and I noticed you had a little problem with the higher power stuff. And I'm like, oh, my God, it's none of your business. Why are you talking to me? Old newcomers understand that feeling. Why are you talking to me? So I listened to him, and he said, I was the same way. I had a problem, too. And my sponsor gave me a great suggestion. I just want to pass it on if it might be helpful to you. He said, have you let them know how angry you are? And I was like, oh, I didn't want to talk to him, but I also didn't want to be impolite. So I said, well, what are you saying? I don't even understand that. He says, well, what I'm saying is he told me to go home and just have it out with God. I need to dump every anger bit, resentment, and hatred and cursing and all that stuff that I can and get it out in the open and be honest with my higher power. Just be straight up. This is where I'm at. And I said, believe it or not, because of my religious programming, I said, well, isn't that blasphemy? Because I was trying to argue against it, but that's also my religious training. He says, well, no, you've already talked to God lots of times that way, and your actions are in your mind. I'm just talking about doing it for real, like really going to him as a man and facing him straight to straight. And I was like, well, I don't get it. And he says, and while you're doing that, you can beat some pillows, you can throw some shit around, break stuff, whatever works for you, but get it out. I'll tell you, it really worked for me. And he basically let it go at that, and then he just disappeared. Those little Eskimos in your path that just happen to show up and give you a little way out. And I was the kind of guy that if you gave me a tool, I would sometimes do it just to prove you wrong. That's kind of how I did sobriety. I'm going to come in here and do these tools just to show you it doesn't work. I'm a very oppositional, defiant kind of drunk. So I went home, and thankfully my roommate was gone. And I went to my bedroom and I just started talking and I started saying, you know, what's this bullshit? My dad died, man. You weren't there for me. And then my family got broken up and you weren't helping us. And my mom was abused and all this shit's going on in the world, and there's wars and there's famine and what the fuck? And I started going on and getting it out and just fucking talking. And I was like throwing shit and hit the pillow just like he told me to do. And all of a sudden, this tidal wave of wrath and anger and rage, I was screaming. Probably my neighbors were ready to call the cops. Like, what the hell is going on up there? But I was just going with it. It just, once I opened the floodgates, went from a trickle to a flow to a fucking tidal wave really fast. And it didn't take that long. It's not like it went on for a long time. I'd say 5 minutes at the most, maybe. Sure, if you had been sitting there watching it and judging yourself, you'd be like, well, that's embarrassing. Look at this guy. What's he doing? But I just didn't worry about it. I was just doing it, prove it's not going to work, and then leave it at that. And then I didn't do anything else. I just went to bed. In the next 2 weeks, a very strange thing happened, as if suddenly the gates of the floodwaters had been broken and now the flow was going through my life of being able to talk to this power that I never believed was there. I caught myself a few days later at work. Guy next to me was really getting on my damn nerves, and I actually said to myself, oh, Jesus Christ, please help me not punch this motherfucker. And I went, wait a minute, that sounds like a prayer. That's not like me. I don't pray. What am I doing? I would usually just say, don't let me punch him. I wouldn't say to something specifically. But it caught my ear that I was actually doing an entreaty to this power that I didn't believe was there. That was the same connection I was talking to that night when I was angry. And over the next few weeks, I started to rely on it more. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to start this journey of developing your own relationship with a higher power, you have to get into action and use it. All right? It does not work for addicts and alcoholics to hear me tell you about it. It does not work for us to read it in a book or to use someone else's spirituality. At a certain point, I ask my newcomer, well, look, you've got this problem. You think you're going back to work? You think they might fire you? Yeah. So you've been doing good, though? You don't deserve to be fired? Yeah. Well, have you asked your higher power to keep your job because it supports your recovery? No. Well, why don't you do that? Why don't you test it? Why don't you try to work it? And then invariably, as they use it, and the more I began to use it, the more I began to see that this power was there. Now, I want to elucidate on this term God, because I don't use that in my personal life anymore. I do, but I don't really believe in such a thing. There is this force, and if you want to use a Star Wars type term, there's this power that seems to be available to human beings, that if they will turn things over, rely on it, have a relationship with it, and use it, it shows up like electricity. Literally like plugging in this thing where you don't have the power to do something and you say, please help me get to this appointment I don't want to do. And all of a sudden you're getting up and you're going and you do the appointment. That's a small example. Or like Dan, hey, we're going to plug into this power and keep you out of prison. And he's coming to me saying, I can't believe that they're now going to let me do home incarceration, and they dropped the 20-year charge. How does that happen? And at that moment, I knew he was beginning his journey to learn about this power for himself. Now, I'm an open-minded guy. I love neuroscientists. I love quantum physicists. If somebody wants to come to me and say, well, I just believe that's just a trick of your mind, and because you convince yourself there's something there, your mind's like manifesting it, that's what makes it happen. You know what? I don't really care. I don't care what you call it. I just know that for 40 years, I have relied on this force that I have worked damn hard to take away my barriers, reveal myself completely to that through the fourth and fifth step. The more I reveal myself to God, the more God reveals himself to me. I can't go to it hiding and keeping secrets. And the more I've relied and used that power, the more it showed up in my life, and I have the best life I've ever had, ever. And I've watched too many people use that same power to save their life and get well. It's extraordinary how real this is. But again, it's buried in dogma and terminology and programming that if you don't confront that, you won't be able to get to a new belief in it. So to end on, let's talk about this tool called the God inventory, because that is not in the big book. This is something we've learned. We have learned a lot in 85 plus years or more, 87 years of recovery that we didn't know back in the 1930s. Okay, we have millions of people doing this process, and along the way they learned little tricks that work better. And it's not in the big book about doing a God inventory, so please spread the word. I tell my guy, look, you've got blocks. Even if you tell me you don't, you do. You've got some sort of thing, because you can say you believe, but you don't really trust it. You don't trust it with your money. You don't trust it with your kids or with your safety or with your job. So let's work on that. Let's find out what your blocks are. So let's do a thing called a God inventory. Well, what is that? Well, the first thing I want you to do is get a pad of paper and a pen, and you're going to skip 2 lines between each entry. And I want you to close your eyes and do a little meditation. Just get yourself still and get quiet. And then ask yourself, when I hear the word God, what comes up on my computer screen? What comes up in my mind? So, let's say you start making your list. Church, skip 2 lines, Bible, religion, spirit, soul. And you just start making your list. Just keep going down the line. Just so you can unload what's in your mind. And then notice how many of those things that are in your mind are negative, like sin or like damnation or whatever, fear, stuff like that. Then you're going to take a pause, go get yourself a drink of water, go, refill your soda, whatever. Take a little walk around, use the bathroom, then come back, another again, settle yourself, get quiet the mind, and say, all right, let me go through this list and determine where did these messages come from. So if it's a message of church, where'd you get that from? It could be from your parents, could be from the church itself. Maybe there was a certain preacher, even if you don't remember their name. If he had blonde hair, you write preacher with blonde hair. Or maybe you learned it off TV or in movies, okay? But try to confront who put that programming in you. Just skipping 2 lines, just putting it right next to the word of where you got that from. Then after that, take another pause. And then when you come back, this is something I see some people skip over this part, but I think it's very helpful. Then ask yourself, if you're looking at getting that from your aunt, like my aunt used to tell us, you're going to hell if you don't stop smoking dope. And you're confronting that's where you got that idea. Ask yourself what kind of walk your aunt had as a spiritual walk in her life as the result of that belief. If your aunt truly believed that a sinner was going to be sent to hell, see how that reflected and showed up and displayed itself in her daily life for the results she was getting out of life. Okay? So if you look at your aunt a second time and you say, you know what? She went to church every day and she was very helpful and served in the church. She sang in the choir. She was a church member. But now that I think deeper about it, my aunt was actually pretty judgmental because she said you're going to hell to a lot of people. And actually, my aunt would say that behind people's backs. So she was kind of a gossip. And she was always negatively gossiping about people. She was never saying anything positive. So what was up with my aunt that she felt so insecure that she had to keep judging people and calling them sinners? And you'll start picking it apart, and you'll eventually get to a place where you're like, ooh, that's not a teacher I want to follow. Because if I believe that, if I follow that belief, I'm going to get what that teacher got. It's very important to challenge what you got and where it comes from. Then you get to go through on the last piece, which a lot of people jump straight to, which is I'm going to knock off all the things that God is not to me today, not where I was back then. So to me, God is not judgmental. I don't want that kind of higher power. I don't want a higher power that would send kids to hell. That's not going to work for me. That will get me drunk. And then I look at my list and circle what I do like, because you actually do have some programming that works for you, like God can be forgiving. And I encourage all of y'all to pick that kind of a higher power. We addicts and alcoholics definitely need a forgiving God. And when you get to the end of it, you'll have a brand new understanding in the future that when you hear that word and it brings up that old stuff, you can say, oh yeah, that's my aunt. Oh yeah, that comes from my dad, or that's what my grandmother grew up with, and she had a miserable life. She was terrified when she died, yet she claimed to believe. That belief did not serve her very well. So that's what a God inventory. I've got to figure out what's in my trash can. We do that in step 4 with all the things we've done in life, but now you need to do it with just what you got around other people's beliefs, what was programmed into you. And I promise you, the people that have actually done that, all of a sudden they start to free up. And it doesn't bother them so much to talk about spirituality. And they actually get excited. Now they want to read books and check out new things. And they're sending me links to YouTube videos. And suddenly they're turned on again, like that little kid who's excited about God. So that's where we want to get back to. Okay? I hope that makes sense to you. So to sum up, the third step does not have to be that hard. It's your programming and your baggage that's going to get in the way. And I'm going to tell one last story about that I thought was a very profound example of that. I had a patient one time who was telling me that the church they grew up in, they liked, they thought was beautiful, and they still went to today. That was their belief. That was their faith. I said, there's fine. You get to choose your own path of spirituality. If going to church is part of that, God bless you. That works for you. That's great. And they said, but I still hung up on this guilt and shame from when I was drinking and drugging. I don't feel like I'm worthy, like I can't quite get over it. I don't feel like you say God's forgiving, and I know that, but there's something that's sticking in me that's not quite able to accept that. And I stopped them in their tracks, and I said, well, let me ask you a question. You went to the same church I went to. Yes, I did. And you went to communion, did you? Yes, I did. And what did they make you say before communion, before you get up and accept? Do you remember what you say? She says, well, kind of. I said, did you say, I know I am not worthy to receive you, but only say the words and I shall be healed? She goes, yeah. I said to her, how many times do you think you said that in your lifetime? She was bowled over. She could not even come up with a number of how many times she had said that as a programming. You say things, the brain pays attention, the brain begins to believe it. You do it 10 times, it won't really, you could 100, you do it 1,000 or 10,000 times. When do you start getting a deep subconscious belief that I am not worthy to accept forgiveness unless I meet certain conditions that my church lays out? Today is to kick all that to the curb. It will free you like you've never been freed before. Go on your own journey for what it means to you. And if it means going hunting like my friend Dan, sitting up in a tree stand all day long and reading a meditation book as he does, or if it means climbing the highest mountain or working out and building your body as part of your faith, whatever your deal is, find one that works for you and be open. So it is not a religious program. AA does not tell you what to do. And to end on, I always joke with people, it's like, well, if it's a religious program, let me know if there's a church out there where you can get up during the middle of a meeting and you can say, F all this stuff and F your God and F everything you've all said and I'm out of here, and then and see what they do. I did that in my home group, basically. And my home group said, we love you, keep coming back. I don't think there's many churches that would allow you to do that during the middle of the service. Think about it. All righty. So we're going to transition now into our discussion period. And I know I was clicking a lot of buttons with Dan because he was making furious mad notes over there. So let's see what this man over here has to say about the topic.
If there was any spot that really changed my way of thinking, it was having you take me through the thoughts like you just did as far as the third step. Nobody had ever gave me permission, really, to have my own connection with this power everybody's talking about. I really never had the blocks and the stuff. One thing is I didn't get dragged to church when I was a little kid. So I didn't have a lot of the blocks, and Bill wraps it up real good in the book about, I thought some of the ideas seemed perfectly reasonable, but the other ones I just ignored. And, I kind of still do that. Not all of it do I subscribe to, and that's okay. See, nobody ever gave me permission to say, okay, I don't have to subscribe to this. And this whole thing about creating, getting, we say a relationship with the power greater than ourselves, but over time, what has really been more valuable to me is this reliance on this higher power that I've got, like this safety net of the universe underneath of me that allows me to take chances and do things and feel safe in my actions. That I'm not, we say, God didn't bring me this far to drop me off here, and that reliance on it really does that. You had mentioned the 4 absolutes, and I looked them up on the computer, and it's honesty, unselfishness, purity, and love. And as an active alcoholic, there is absolutely no way not that I could subscribe to that stuff. I couldn't follow it, and people will say, like the honesty one here, and I talked about that a couple of weeks ago about this, this pure honesty, rigorous honesty. I like the way Scott Lee talks about it. It's as honest as I can be. It's not, I know when I'm lying, but I don't have to chop my foot off with honesty. I don't have to put my neck in the guillotine. But those were those 4 things. I'll tell you something else that's really a hang up, and for new people coming to 12-step meetings, is we always meet in freaking churches. So that puts a stamp on it, It's like, okay, you're telling me we're not talking about this God that I grew up with, but yet you're telling me that right here in one of those buildings, Funny thing about it is that the meetings I go to at churches tend to be a higher quality of meeting than the ones I go to that are not in churches. As far as, the clubs and that kind of thing, I've always, appreciated the guys and the people that were meeting at the churches for some. I have no idea why that seems to be a thing.
You know what, though? I love that point that, throwing a lot of love on churches, because I do tend to pick them apart a bit. That very fact that they've allowed us to be in there. Now, with the Oxford group, they were not tolerated in that church. When they were doing their little meeting with the drunks, they wanted the drunks to be separate down the basement. And eventually they wanted them kicked out. So that's what caused the New York group to split and eventually go out on their own, because they figured, well, A, we can't follow the four absolutes, but B, we're not really welcome here. Now, the Ohio groups held on longer because of Dr. Bob wanted it to be a part of the Oxford group, because that's what he was familiar with. Yeah. But yes, thank God for our churches that have tolerated us. But the idea for the newcomer is that we pay rent and we own that room. And that means that they have no right to tell us what to do in that closed door, as long as we're not interfering. We don't let anybody else in the group the church hear us. They're not interfere with what they're doing. And you should hear the talk in an average AA meeting. It's not the average kind of talk you're going to hear in a church. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. And, that natural thing that we have, and I'm sure it goes back to some of the things you're talking about, the survival skill stuff. The fact that we have this negative bias, because things that are negative we need to be real careful about, like a snake bite is a negative thing, and people know about a snake bite, right? Well, we tend to end up using that in other ways too. When I'm being brought up in church, my brain will hang on to the negatives more so than the positives. What it is about humans that do that, I guess that, except for the survival skill thing, that we are programmed to be careful of danger.
Well, let's define it for what it really is, Dan. We're talking about trauma for some people.
Yeah.
And when I look at, the people felt they were doing right in the 60s, the nuns would hit children and abuse them. Okay, well, if you did that today, you go to jail.
Yeah.
But back then, that was normalized. And that's traumatic for a child to go through. So they're associating physical pain with this loving parent that's supposed to care about them. Naturally, that's going to warn them and say, well, be careful. Don't go in here. That's not safe. You shouldn't do that.
And just to put a thumbprint on that, I've done a podcast on the Spiritual Underground with my father. And when he grew up going to school in the early 50s, late 40s, he was traumatized. So whenever he's raising me, he's not even introducing me to it hardly at all, because of the trauma that happened to him, being physically beaten and berated. And Dad was colorblind, and they thought he was just jerking him around when it come to okay, draw the circle red. Well, he didn't know what was going on, and he would pick up a crayon that he thought was red, and he would do it, and they would punish him because he didn't pick the right color. And he's like, I don't know how to pick the right color. I don't see them right. But nobody said, oh, wow, maybe the little guy's colorblind. No, we'll knock you over the knuckles with a ruler until you start seeing the right colors, buddy.
I don't want to stretch us in too far of a direction, but I do, just to have people ponder this interesting podcast I was watching recently about there's so much change going on in our understanding about differences and people's, in minority populations and things that we might look at and say, well, that's weird. Why do they do it that way? Well, we're coming to a place where we're growing as a species, but we've had so much happen immediately because of technology. Otherwise, we wouldn't be aware without YouTube and whatever else these other people are doing. So it's overwhelming us, and there's too much change at once. The human animal can't swallow all that. So that's part of the friction. But the idea that, a child who has ADD and beating that child as a way to deal with ADD, we would never do that today. But back in the day, they've done it. I have many of my sponsees grew up in the 60s and 70s, and that's what they were abused for having a learning disability.
Yep.
And that's just one example of how we're evolving to understand, maybe it's a brain thing, and maybe they're not doing it on purpose.
Yep.
There's still people in this world that want to hang us from the highest tree for being alcoholics and addicts. Right?
Yep. And, ultimately, I could not help it. It is no more than Dad could help being colorblind.
I've had people in front of me who don't even know what I am or what I do say they should just line them up and shoot them.
Yeah.
All these damn heroin addicts.
Yeah. Of course, I always like the one.
And they'll have a cigarette in one hand, And
the one that always triggers me is when somebody talks about hating I hate a effing thief.
Yeah.
And because that was what, I stole stuff to do that, and I'm like, maybe that thief is suffering from something that you don't understand, but, and you're ready to shoot him for steal, cut off his fingers. A friend of mine early on in recovery that had a very open mind, before I ever met you, made a statement that still echoes, and he just simply said he was just talking. He wasn't making any kind of statement or anything. He was just talking, and people had the, discussing the God thing. He said, I draw from all the ancient spiritual teachings I can. And that really set a hook in me that, it was another one of those permissions, because one of my problems was I thought that I had to be in a particular box. You had to be, okay, I'm going to have to pick Catholic, I'm going to have to pick Baptist, I'm going to have to be Jewish, I'm going to have to jump in somebody's box. And that was the first time, as crazy as it might sound, was the first time somebody told me, no, man, you can dip your hand in all those boxes and pull out what you like. And that has served me very well, because the ancient spiritual teachings have got tons of value. And then once you start looking into it, it's all on a parallel course for the most part. Just like everybody said, it's an inside job.
That's a level of growth that's miracle level. In my own experience, reading Emmett Fox and learning about what Jesus was really teaching, not what they were telling me in my church. And it's like, oh, they missed the point entirely. Yep. Now, look, I always had the approach like the Doobie Brothers, Jesus is just all right with me. It never truly bothered me until people get in your face and say, you believe in Jesus?
Exactly.
And no, I do not believe in your Jesus. That's a homophobic, hatred, bigoted, sort of going to kill anybody that doesn't believe your way kind of God. No, I don't believe in that. Sorry. And then the people, the other thing they'll throw at you is, do you believe in God? And I'm just like, oh, what a loaded question, pal. Yeah. It's like, well, I know there's a power that's there that can help me. I don't know about defining it. I tell my sponsors, if anybody says they know what God is, you need to run away from them as far as you can, because that person's about to fall. Pride goes before a fall. How many preachers have we seen get on TV and they're ripping you off for money, but they're telling you, I'm the way, listen to me, I know I can heal you with my hands, I know what God is, and all of a sudden they're exposed and they lose everything, go to jail or something.
Jordan Peterson talks about that question about believing in God, and he simply says it matters what you mean by God. Well, what are you saying when you ask me that? What are you asking
Define
me?
it.
Define it. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep. What do you mean by that? And I was just listening to a podcast today, and I love to listen, for whatever reason, I love to listen to these Special Forces soldiers tell their life stories. And I bumped into one that's out there right now, and he is a recovered alcoholic, and he got sober when he was just in the regular Army, and he was bound. He didn't know what, and he spells it out just like we do. He didn't understand that he had a problem. His dad had got sober 4 years before he did, and he told his sponsor, "Hey man, I'm just here. I'll work these steps, and what I'm doing is I'm gonna prove to my father that they don't work." And it worked, and so whatever gets you here, go ahead and work these steps to prove it doesn't work. I think everybody's got a little bit of that in them, that it's like, I'm special. I'll show you. I'll do these steps, and they won't work for me.
One other revolutionary change for me was this understanding that I never got from my church, that I don't have to check my intellect at the door just because we're talking about God. Now, when I first came in, some of the old timers were beating me up with that crap, like, just know there's a God and it ain't you. Keep it simple, stupid. And I'm like, well, maybe that works for you because you're an imbecile. But I think about things. And I tell my sponsees, challenge everything you hear at a meeting. Yep. Every damn thing they say at a meeting you hear, because there's a lot of sick people in there selling some stuff that can get you sick.
Yep.
So if they're telling you think before a relapse, you're going to get drunk. That's a terrible bit of advice. There was a sign on our clubhouse. They had all these old sayings on the wall, and the one said, think, and I used to rat on that all the time in my group. And when they tore down our clubhouse and rebuilt it, much newer, better version in another part of town, somebody got that sign for me, and it's sitting in my office right now. Yeah. Think. It's just, people are misguided. And, I always was taught by my teachers that when you listen to any speaker, even if it's me or Dan, how does it make you feel? Does it resonate? Does it make sense? Don't shoot the messenger. Try to listen for the message. But usually if you're getting that feeling like, ugh, this is making me uptight, trust your soul telling you it's probably a false prophet.
Yep. And talk about an ancient spiritual teacher. That was one of Buddha's big lines. Don't believe me. What's it feel in you? Check it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. What's it doing for you?
Love that.
Yep. And that's a good example of one of the great spiritual teachings that I've drawn from. Man, you could talk about this forever.
It's a fun topic.
It's really taking a guy through the third step is one of my funnest things, because I know I'm like pushing boundaries and paradigms in my friend that he had never considered.
And let's help our listeners who are sponsors out there who don't know how we do it, because we've learned a lot. We do it. We have a tradition in our group that we ask our new guy, is there a place that's very special and meaningful to you that we're just not going to do this in a Jerry's restaurant or at the 7-Eleven or in my car? And we do. I've seen so many people, would you do your third step? Yeah. Did you get anything out of it? Not really. Where'd you do it? In my sponsor's car.
Or get sent off alone to do it.
Yeah. Yeah,
do your third step and call me afterwards.
That's kind of dumb. You're going to lose your guide at one of the most important junctures of your progress. So we actually ask them to find that place. Hopefully it's somewhere that's drivable in a short amount of time. And you go there. That's an old tradition we've lost. Oh, a pilgrimage so that we can go somewhere and make an effort that we're going to sacrifice some time and energy to get there. And then we get there, we're going to take a moment to acknowledge the space and be present and do a meditation. And then we're going to do the prayer together. I'm going to show you how we do it, and then you're going to do it. And then I'm going to say extra words. I want to mirror for my sponsee that it's okay to speak to his higher power the way he speaks, even if he cusses. Boy, is that one of my biggest hot buttons. Yeah. I found my higher power by cussing, in case you didn't hear the word. And I will still go to meetings where they will have signs on the wall that say cussing is not spirituality. And I beg to differ, sir. Some of our most honest prayers as drunks and drug addicts was when we were furious and cursing God out. It may have been the only time we talked to God, when we were using. That's how I found my higher power. So again, he's violating a tradition of the program by putting that sign on the wall. If the tradition of our program is everybody gets to have their own conception, why are you telling me I shouldn't curse around God? That is you forcing your conception on me. You need to go back to school and listen to Bill Wilson about the traditions. So, but I want my sponsee to feel completely comfortable to speak in his own language, especially if he's from the streets. You don't have to dress up for your higher power. So I will pray to my higher power about what we're doing here and how much I love him and I appreciate all his help. And then I let my guy do his own little thing. And then we sit and we feel, does God show up? That's the other worst thing people do. They say the prayer, blah, 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 and they get right up. I know, and you get nothing. There's no listening. There's no meditation. You got to be present. Yeah. And I have had so many cool things happen, and I know you have too, that are just like, did you feel that wind pick up? Or did you feel that bird all of a sudden light on your shoulder and look at you, and you're like, what the fuck? There's a bird on my shoulder. What's happening?
Or my guy will have something that he observes that totally gets by me because it's his thing, and he'll have some flash happen for him, and he'll be excited about it. And of course, I'm excited about it too, but it didn't get me.
Especially like if it's a relative that I felt the presence of my grandfather or something that had passed away.
Usually it'll be some sign of a past relative. That's what I'm actually thinking about. Something will happen. There will be a car that drives by with Dorothy on the license plate right then, and his grandma was Dorothy, and he was thinking about her.
I love that stuff.
That kind of stuff. One of the things about it is the step says turn your will over, your life in your will over care of God as you understand Him. Right. That third step is what it says, every time my guys will ask me, well, so how do I do that? Just how do I do that? And I don't really know the answer to that, but I know what I tell them for starters. And I even have it written down. For starters, I say, one thing you're going to do is you're going to adhere to my suggestions the best that you can. That's one way you're going to turn your will over to the care of God. And you're going to go to meetings and share. You're going to meet with me. You're going to do step 4 and the rest of the steps. What have I got on here other than that? Develop and use your support group. We got these great guys around here. One way you're going to show that you're turning your will over is by calling these guys and talking to them and developing a relationship with those guys. And I also tell them that this is the last time. This is my invitation for you to quit. If you don't want to do this, because it says choose well and it says make a decision, and this is a chance. This is also a decision for you to say, yeah, man, I'm just not feeling it.
Or I'm going to do the work. I'm fully in.
One of the two.
All your poker chips to the middle.
What's the decision going to be?
It's time to ante up.
Yep.
So, but I like what Scott Lee says, just to keep it simple, because all of those are dynamite and right on target. But so just in one statement, Scott Lee says, I know that my guy has taken a successful third step when he shows up at the meeting with his 4-step journal under his arm.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it. He's doing the work.
Yep.
If he's doing the work, then he's turned it over.
Yep.
And how many people do we say do a prayer and never do a 4-step? Sadly, too many.
And I've had a couple people accept my invitation.
I'm out of here.
A few people I have.
Thanks,
right,
bud. I
right
got
here on the
enough.
couch. Actually, I have one gentleman that told me, he said, I have prayed on, because he was quoting Bible verses at me, and it was clear that he knew more about the Bible than I did. And I know I accepted that and acknowledged that to him. But when it came time, it was actually sitting on my couch in my living room. He said, I've prayed on it, and I don't want to do it. Cool, man. Good, because we got a lot of work to do, and you can hit the bricks if you want to. It's okay with me. I'm just trying to help you.
I want to get to our questions, but I got to tell this one story because it was one of the most powerful experiences I had. I'm sitting in a jail cell with this hardened convict who had 53 felonies, and we didn't think he was going to make it, but he did. He was freed, and he was completely taken off paper, no record of his offenses. And then he became a counselor, and he was a great grandfather to his granddaughter, and became a minister even. But I'm sitting in this jail cell, and he's quoting Bible at me, and he used to tell me there's nothing worse, and I won't say the way he used to say it, there's nothing worse than a reborn Christian in the joint. He says, I will cross the yard to beat you with this book. He's trying to save everybody. He can't even run his own life right. And he's sitting in his jail cell, and he started quoting that shit. And we're talking about step 3. And I said, at some point, I just said, well, here's the bottom line. I just got tired of it. I said, and I'm looking for the guard to see if he can let me out of this cell in case this guy turns violent on me. And he goes, and I go, bottom line is, man, you know more about that book maybe, and you can quote better than I can quote about it. But there's one problem with what you're telling me. And he goes, what's that, dog? He was just looking for a fight. I said, well, when we get done talking, I'm going to walk out these doors a free man, and you're going to sit here in this jail cell. What's wrong with your spirituality?
Yeah.
And that clicked. He will tell people to this day in his story, that moment was a shift to say, these people have something I don't have.
Yep.
Despite his ego wanting to say he already had everything.
Yep. And Bill says it in the book.
And I pray all of y'all get somebody that doesn't sign off on your bullshit, like I said about that speaker earlier. We all need occasionally to be pulled up by our short hairs and say, you're not making sense, buddy.
Yeah. Because if your faith was working so well for you, you wouldn't be here with me.
So go on the journey. I know you would validate this, Dan. It is that is the juice of the program. The God stuff is the very juice. When I get up in the morning and I'm like, war in Ukraine, an election with 2 idiots, corporations ruining this world, we're all going to die. That's my first thought. And then I'm like, I got to go to work, and I got so much to do today, and I got to deal with these people. And I'm already having a bad day. And suddenly, on the way to work, something happens, if I'm open and I'm present, and I'll see a little higher power influence somewhere. And I'm like, oh my God, life is worth living. There is actually a force that is good. By the way, my t-shirt said that good is way overwhelming evil in this world, despite whatever the TV is trying to program you, because the world would not operate if it wasn't otherwise. This world could not function if everyone was evil and horrible and out for themselves. Yeah. When they're trying to divide us, they have an agenda. Stop listening to them. When they say we're so different, we're not. If you talk to an average person, they care about their kids, a good education for them, a good family, everybody's got good health, maybe some good health care, and a home. That's it. We all have the same values, and those people have agendas of control and power over us. Stop listening. It's a lie. And we'll talk about that in a podcast in the future.
Best thing I ever did was turned off my TV forever. It helped me.
It's just more programming, and I don't have space in my head for it. So, all right, great topic. Again, if you have any questions about your God journey or anything that's going on with that, please send it to iam12recovery.com. That's iam12recovery.com. All righty, let's get right to our questions portion. We have 2 questions this week, and I hope everybody will send in anything. We need content, so please send in your questions about any topic at all. As long as it's family friendly to a point, YouTube will flag us if not. So, all right, so let's read the first question for the day. I have been working with my peer support and my therapist on trying to identify and feel my feelings. It's really hard to identify and express my feelings. In my shadow work, explain what that means in a second, it had me working on dealing with unresolved grief from alcohol, death of loved ones, etc. What would you recommend to help this process? I'm starting to believe that maybe I am emotionally incapable. Okay, great question. So when you talk about shadow work in therapy, what that means is that Dr. Carl Jung believed that every person had a shadow self, which is our darker side. And I don't believe we do enough in our culture to celebrate that and to tame it and to use it. A shadow self can be very effective to get stuff done. anger, rage, darkness, cynicism. You can actually tame those and turn that energy into something positive if you get mastery over it. So it's about acknowledging that, yes, I try to be a positive person. I try to be a force for good in this world, but I'm a human being and I have to have some appreciation of the darkness for me to know joy. You cannot know happiness and joy if you don't also know depression and suffering. Okay. So thank God this person's at this point of their recovery that they're starting to do this work. There's actually a phase of recovery called second stage recovery. There's a whole book written about that, and that's what it's called, second stage recovery, which he's talking about now that we've healed our addictions and our bad habits. Now we're going to work on our emotional sobriety, which Bill Wilson was big about. Before he died, he wrote a whole article in the Grapevine magazine, which was the AA magazine, about, you can be sober, but you might not be emotionally sober, which means, how are you inside? How are you on the inside? Now, the problem is for men in our culture, and I'll just speak on that behalf because I'm one of them, we have been sold a bill of goods that men are not allowed to have feelings. Now, it's changed tremendously in the past 20 or 30 years. But even the young kids today that I get in my group, there's still this little thing about it's not safe, or I'm not supposed to, or it shows weakness if I cry. And one of the things that Scott Lee talks about is if you have trouble crying, talk to me. I have a whole pamphlet where I can help you. Now, I'm going to summarize that pamphlet for you because one of the most best things I've learned to do about it is everybody has a certain movie or a certain song that just gets you right here because it reminds you of a loved one, or you've been through that experience yourself, or it's just such a cute movie about a dog that it just gets you right there because the dog dies at the end of the movie. And we encourage people when they're just starting out to get the waterworks flowing. Maybe you just need to go home, rent the movie, close the curtains, get a box of Kleenex, and allow yourself to just start getting emotional through the movie. A lot of people will have a block with this. It's not okay to cry. And so then that becomes, I'm trying to force myself to do this shadow work. And that never is productive. So I say, start the crying with the dog in the movie, or with the little sister that gets cancer. And it's so sad, right? Because you had a little sister yourself. And then when you start feeling the emotions, pause the movie and sit with the feeling. Allow it to relate to your grief or to your unresolved trauma, and see if there's any tears that come out on that behalf. I've gotten to a place in my own recovery where I can cry pretty easily from a movie or from a news story or something that's very uplifting or touching, even a commercial that I just think is just really perfect. And then I'll take a moment and relate that, that was a little part of my kid that still needed to grieve, that my father wasn't there for me because his disease killed him. And that's grief and that's trauma. We're going to have a whole episode on trauma coming up in the future. But for now, I think that's important for men is just to first honor the feelings are there and then take some time to actually do it like an exercise. Now, it may not happen the first time, but then we try it a second time. And maybe on the second time, that's when the waterworks break. You watch a different movie. But any opportunity, and if you're at a meeting and somebody moves you, or you hear a speaker and somebody moves you, if it starts to tear up, pause it and start to feel your feelings from the grief. Start to acknowledge the trauma that's there, and then connect those emotions and see if it starts to flow a little bit better. So that's number one. Number two is I can't express enough about what journaling has done for me in my life. I think journaling saved me in my early sobriety. It gave me clarity about what I was suffering for that day. And my sponsor taught me it was like taking out the trash. He said you would never cook fish or some smelly dish in your house and leave it sitting in your trash can overnight, stink up your house. You take it outside, right? He says, well, you guys in early sobriety that come in my group all the time saying they're not sleeping. I'm like, yeah, because your brain is filled with all kinds of nastiness. And then you just watch something horrible on TV like CSI or the first 48, and now you got anxiety. And then you smoked a cigarette. And but I'm not sleeping. Yeah, no crap. So taking out the trash by writing whatever's on your mind. You have to give yourself permission that whatever comes out of the pen is what comes out. You also have to be sure that nobody else sees your journal. So make sure it's on lockdown. Otherwise, you won't feel safe to really open up. And then maybe it's a day where you don't feel anything. You just draw a cartoon. I had that several days. Or one day I just wrote F, and you know what that stands for. And it was the whole page. And that must have been a really bad day in my early recovery. But that journaling gave me the clarity, like, I'm connecting the dots, that I'm still feeling this from this situation or that from that situation. So that's another great tool to use on the shadow work. hard to identify and express. So there's really two things there. I'm not sure what I feel, and I'm not sure what the appropriate way is to get it out. I don't think you're emotionally incapable. Let's just dispel that right away. Instead, what I find with addicts and alcoholics is we are really down on ourselves. And I have to correct many of my patients every day. Stop using value-laden judgment words about why you are the way you are. It just is. The way you are today is because of monkey see, monkey do. We are all living animals, the same as your dog or your cat. We're conditioned, and whatever we grew up with, if you look at your dad, I'm going to guess he was probably pretty emotionally unavailable too, or your grandpa, or whoever down the line taught you that. So it's not that you're emotionally incapable, it's that your programming has really done a number on you to stuff it down. And sometimes it gets so far stuffed down, it doesn't seem accessible. I would say maybe it's not emotionally accessible right now. And again, I don't know if you necessarily have to force it. Again, like I say, just pick up some tools like the journaling, talking to your safe supports, doing the crying exercise. And I was also a big fan of long walks, and I think we've lost that art in our culture. In my early recovery, long walks was where I processed what I was learning from my therapist or what I learned in a meeting that day. I would just take it, and I'd put on my little Walkman. Yes, I was the old cassette tape, doing Welcome My Walkman. And I would go into the Minnesota woods and just lose myself pondering on what I heard or what I learned in the group. And connections started to be made. It's really ultimately an episode of Columbo. I tell my patients, imagine this guy comes into your life with a trench coat and a cigar, and he's bumbling through your life, saying, "Oh, what's this over here? What do you got here? Oh, well, this is interesting. What's this here?" And that's the way he solved crimes. Well, frankly, you have to be willing to do that with your life. Be willing to overturn every rock. Like, well, I didn't think my grandmother played a part of that, but let's look a second time at Grandma and see what part she played in that. And eventually connections and revelations will start to come. And it's an exciting journey. Don't rush it. Bill said it should be a work of a lifetime. But first, let's get on our own side and not say we're inaccessible. I don't think that's true in any way. I think we've been hurt, and trauma causes people to shut down. And talk to other people who have worked through their stuff. Definitely always go to your elders and ask them, how did they do it? And I can't say enough about therapy. If you're in therapy and you're seeing somebody, that's fantastic. And if you find that your therapist hits a dead end with you and that's all you can get out of them, be willing to switch therapists to another therapist. One last word I'll say on that. Do you know how you know if you have a good therapist or not? One thing I was taught. Are they willing to refer out when they are not able to fulfill your needs anymore? If a therapist keeps you on the hook for 10 years, and I had girlfriends like that who said, I still go to the same person. I said, well, I'm sorry to tell you, they're taking your money and they're just listening to you. At 10 years, they haven't fixed anything and you're not ready to move on to another teacher. I don't know about that. So a good therapist would say, all right, I think we've done all the work we can do for now. You can come back and see me later, or you can go see someone else I can refer you to. But keep the questions coming again, and I hope that helps. And just pull anybody aside at a meeting and ask them about it and see what they have to say. All right, second question for today. Let me wet the old whistle a little bit here. What is the difference between working the 12 steps in different recovery groups? Why does it seem like the steps do so well with the disease of alcoholism, but also work in other areas like overeating, gambling, etc.? Does it matter which meeting you go to incorporate into your own recovery journey? No, it doesn't. Except in one area I'll get to in a minute. It's the same 12-step solution. A little background for our listeners who don't know. AA was doing its thing, and it was bound to happen the first night in the early 40s, a drug addict showed up. Now, in the 30s and 40s, a drug addict was like a pimp and a whore mixed together, showing up in a terrible outfit and smelling bad and being drunk and high and just showing up and ruining the whole meeting. I mean, it was the worst scourge of society back in the day. A drug addict. Again, alcohol is a drug. That's how sick they were. I never did drugs. I still get patients to this day who will do that on their first day. I never did drugs. I just drank. Boy, wow, you're so sick. You bought the programming that alcohol is not a drug. Now you're going to die from it. So literally these, they showed up and they're like, oh my God, if he comes in, he might ruin it. And we don't work with drug addicts. We work with drunks, blah, blah, blah. And they wanted to kick him out. And luckily they had a little bit of a group conscience. That's where everybody in the group has a say, and they work it out and they let God come through. And in that process, there's always a right solution. And they came up with this idea that what would the master do? Which again, from their teachings, Jesus. Would Jesus kick this guy out of the temple? And by the way, Alcoholics and Addicts have been kicked out of the temple since the dawn of time. So why don't we help them? So AA taught NA, Narcotics Anonymous, how to do this program. Suddenly, they were having such success. Other movements, gamblers didn't have anything, and they tried to tell us 12 steps, and suddenly we got Gamblers Anonymous, one of the most successful organizations, just as successful as Overeaters Anonymous, or Sexaholics Anonymous, or Nicotine Anonymous, or Spenders Anonymous, or Depression Anonymous. I could go on and on. You Google how many 12-step different fellowships are there, and prepare to be overwhelmed. This solution is the common bond. Don't get too hung up on how it comes to me. You're still working the same solution for recovery. The 12 steps are the exact same. Maybe different angles on them, maybe different approaches, but the mechanisms are still the same about how we find our higher power, how we let go, let our sponsor have the wheel, and we do inventory. It's all the same stuff. So the only key difference, I said there was one. The key difference is how do you most relate? So if I have a person that comes in and says, well, I started in this one group, but these people are telling me because I'm an alcoholic, I'm supposed to go to this other group. And I'm like, well, hold up, Hoss. Don't jump ship so quickly, bro, because you've got something that's working for you. And I got to tell you, that's rare in this world. Most people are not going to make it with this disease. So if somebody came to my group and said they prefer Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian-based approach to the 12 steps. They believe that Jesus is the higher power. They define that for you in that group. And I was like, great, use it. If it works for you, use it. Run with it. You can always go back later and do the other version with another program. You may find you don't like it as much. But if you're having success, I would not screw with the formula. And that's another thing alcoholics like to do. They get up in their head and they start chewing on stuff that doesn't matter. You're doing the work and your life is getting better and it's working. Why are you making this more complicated and you're about to screw this up? So again, just do what works for you. Feel free to switch lanes if you want to. Just realize the grass may not always be greener. Some people will say to me, do you prefer NA or AA? And I said, well, this was my journey. I came to AA and they told me drug addicts weren't welcome. That was in the 80s. Now they understand that AA has a tradition. If it's an open meeting, and make sure you check this, anybody can come in that meeting. That means a counselor, a parent, anybody that's curious about recovery. That's what the word open means. We are open to receive anyone who wants to come check it out. Closed AA meetings means for alcoholics only. So if you go into closed meetings and it has a C on the schedule on the internet, that means if you say you're a drug addict, they might give you some crap. So be careful about that. Nowadays, it's not as prevalent, especially in bigger cities. Louisville has gotten very evolved about that. In my experience, we're pretty cool with whatever you are is what you are, as long as you're not sitting there describing, rigging up with heroin and making it excessive. If you say you're an addict, we're probably not going to jump you. But then I was way more an addict than I was an alcoholic, but I had most of my worst consequences on alcohol. So I was definitely an alcoholic too. My sponsor at one point said to me, just pick one. Stop being special. You know, these people at me and say, I'm a real alcoholic or I'm a special alcoholic. No, you're not. Just be an alcoholic. But I decided to go to AA because they were the original source. And I was a big blues fan. And in the field of the blues, there's a term called the real deal. It's reserved for the top masters, Buddy Guy, John Lee Hooker. These are the guys that are real deal bluesmen. Okay. Willie Dixon. And I needed the source. I was so bad off with my disease, I didn't need a watered down half-second program version. So I went to AA for my drug addiction, and it worked just fine. I think you could go to NA for your alcohol addiction, and it worked just fine. Again, it's about the solution. How is it going to appeal to you to get into the solution, whatever talk or people you relate to in that group, okay? And if it's working, I would encourage people strongly, don't change oars in the midstream. Alcoholics are terrible at sabotaging themselves. I talk to my patients all the time about self-sabotage. Don't doubt that it might be your addict in your brain telling you you need to switch this up because you're about to get well and your disease is going to lose you. And it will fight to keep your ass. So you better check this out before you make any changes. And again, my argument is you can always go back to another group and do it through another group. We have a lot of people go through AA. And then they come to our TSSR group and they find a deeper spirituality doing the steps in that version, or vice versa. I've been to several different fellowships in my journeys through recovery, and I found it interesting. I've not been to Gamblers Anonymous, but I've been just about to every other one. And I needed work in those areas. I checked it out. I found them very, very, each meeting and group does it different, right? So just go check it out. It's free. But I would always encourage people, it's Bill Wilson's best advice. He would get these letters asking for his suggestions throughout his entire career, and he always wrote at the bottom of what he would do. But you are always welcome, as always, to follow your heart and do whatever you feel is best. And that's what I would say. If it's working for you, I would never judge it. Just be careful. Maybe your disease is getting in there and you're thinking too much. That is not our friend, thinking. So what do you think about any of these questions, Dan? Any insights you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, when you talked about the how to cry thing, I'd like to tell you when I heard Scott Lee say that in his speaker thing, I went deep diving in the internet, and he says in that talk that I have a pamphlet. And I have a copy of that pamphlet. So anybody out there listening, I think in the world they call this a call to action. And I'll put this up there, but listen, it's IM12 also, ALSO, IM12 also at Gmail. And I can get you a copy of Scott Lee's thing on how to cry.
So that's Dan's account with this podcast. Mine is the IM12 Recovery. Yours is IM12 also.
Correct.
At Gmail.
Yep.
Same
that
resource.
Is it. Clarifying that. So I have that. I will reiterate that this disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful, man. And it will. I've watched it do the same thing with people on switching sponsors. You know, they're moving down the line, and for whatever reason, they'll think I should switch sponsors. You know, or this switching groups thing is another one that it will get you in the most unreal ways. And hopefully, if you're open with your sponsor and talk to them about it, and you even say, I've had guys come to me and go, "Hey, man, I think I might need to switch sponsors to me." And I go, maybe you do, but let me tell you about it. And we're doing really good, and you're doing the work, and your sponsor will say, they will tell you, maybe you do need to. I've heard people talk about it.
But let's talk about it.
But
let's
talk
make
about
sure we're clear.
It's the same thing that seems
because
to be another universal answer.
This disease is hunting us. It's a mercenary. It will get in any way it can. A mercenary will not let you see it's coming, and it will go to any lengths. It'll violate every value. It doesn't give a fuck. It will make sure it gets its job done and get you. And so, I think it's a valid question to ask in all of our decisions. Is my disease in my head somewhere behind this motivation, and I'm not aware it's driving the bus? Because I don't understand why you would mess with something that's working. That makes no sense to me. After all these years of suffering, and however long it took us to get through the doors, and then you accept and start doing the work, and now you're finally moving, and things are changing for the better in your life. Oh, but let me throw this monkey wrench in here. We are experts at that, are we not?
Yep, no doubt. And there's this when we work the 12 steps, and most of us will find this, that like as far as using other 12-step programs, is that you get the alcohol and the dope off your back, and you see your overspending issue or your eating issue or something else rears up in its place. Maybe it wasn't even there at all, but you'll substitute, and it might be that you want to go to another 12-step program that focuses on that, because there is some value to being in a room with people who suffer from the same affliction as you do.
And there's no reason to be depressed or feel bad at that point. A lot of my patients are overwhelmed and say, "Oh, now I got to deal with this." I say, "Well, wait a minute. No, whoa. Not saying that it wasn't there, but what if it was the underlying addiction you started with? If you will go back through your journey, folks, and you will look at as a kid, as you had this brain we have, and you felt these feelings we have even as a child, and you didn't have alcohol and drugs, what else did you use to cope? Those were your first addictions. Those were the first things you started with. And that's actually progress. That's something you can feel proud of. Oh, great. I've got my addiction under control with drugs. Now I get to work on this. That's a great thing.
You just said it. Get to. You said, your person says, I got to deal with this now. No, you get to. And grow more, to go further on that. Bill says that all through the book is this thing is about continuing your spiritual growth. And that might mean going and doing the steps another way. Get a different teacher. It also, lost my spot. I'll have to talk about it and then it'll come right back to me.
get a different teacher, go down a different road, check it out. You can always shift gears.
Yep.
There's no wrong decisions in recovery.
It's just like with passions.
Mm-hmm.
Dive in a new direction,
Mm-hmm.
to put your toe in the water and see how it feels and give it a shot. And if you don't like it, you can always just pull your toe back out of the water.
Just the main thing. Don't monkey it if it's working. Be careful.
Yeah, if you're making
It's too hard to get this far in recovery, 8 through 4, 5, 6, whatever, and wherever you're at in the steps.
And
look, you fought so hard to get here. It's almost like a siege on a castle, and you have this horde of Vikings coming over the hill, and we have fought through land, and we first took the ship over here, and now we're on land, and we're fighting the guys to get just to the castle, and you get there, and you're like, well, wait a minute, let me back up and try and reconfigure my plan of attack. Yeah. It's like, you're in it, dude. You're about to siege the castle. Why are you changing gears right now?
Yeah, but... And, this is a little, this is where it gets tricky and you need to be talking to somebody about it. Sometimes it is. If it's not working, I do that. I have a personal 3 strikes and you're out rule with me. If you stumble 3 times while we're working the program, something's not working. And it's not that I don't like you and I will help you in every way that I can. But whatever we're doing isn't keeping you sober. So let's maybe see. It's amazing how the right 2 people hit together. And it'll work, where 2 personalities that maybe for whatever reason are not clicking on all cylinders and just doesn't.
Sometimes the fit just isn't right.
It's just right, yeah. Sometimes it's not. But, don't make those decisions by yourself. That's kind of like his third step.
Always check it out.
Always check it out. It's a universal thing.
We have a sick brain that's trying to kill us, so be careful.
That's where I was going about this universal... some universal rules here, and one of them is when you have the problem, talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. That's an answer. That's one of the actions. We say, ask God to remove it is one thing, and then talk to somebody about it. And then, of course, that other one is help somebody. You got these little tools that you can always shift into, man. And I still make mistakes, but I make a better quality mistake when I talk to my sponsor about it. That's a Scott Lee line too.
One other point you made earlier, Dan, which I thought was excellent, is that it also might be your disease. You don't want to do the next step.
Yeah.
You shifting gears is like, I don't want to do my amends, or I don't want to do my 4th step. Now that I've done my 3rd step, I don't want to tell you what I did. I had a fellow write me the other day and said, I'm stuck. I don't want to tell my sponsor what I did. But I said, dude, that's on step 5. You're doing step 4. Why don't you just write it down? You don't even have to put it in code. He'll never know what it is. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to tell him or not. Well, I didn't even hear back from the guy, not even a thank you or anything.
Yeah. And
alcoholics are weird creatures, man. That's all I can say. They're just...
I'm going to go there, and a lot of people kind of, it gets a little bit of a sticky thing, but different groups are doing the steps in a million different ways, and it's working for, I'm sure it works in every single way. But the recipe you brought down from your teachers to me that I currently use today is a super effective way of going about this work, and you'll be able to, it's being documented. It is documented, and that recipe is available to people. You get a little bit funny when you start talking, my way's better than yours, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm doing is speaking from my experience and the many men I've had, men and women, that I've had the opportunity to use this recipe on, and it just works really good. I had a guy the other day, and it just come out of my head, and he was talking about why I was doing something particular. He didn't think it would make any difference. And I said, do you like Chick-fil-A? And he said, oh, yeah. So what do you think if they would stop putting one ingredient into their batter? He said, it probably wouldn't be as good. And I looked at him, just sat there and stared at him. And I said, that's the same thing here, man. I am afraid to take one ingredient out of here because it's not going to taste the same.
Yeah, that sauce for sure. If they monkey with that sauce, they're going out of business.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, that's our goal ultimately for this podcast, and you will be a part of this if you keep staying with us. I am currently rewriting a book on the 12 steps for everybody, and we've been starting these groups in Louisville. Instead of just talking the talk that we wish other people had this program, we're actually trying to spread it to everybody because our world's hurting out there and nobody's giving them any tools that work. So I promise you, all this methodology, everything we're talking about will be in a place where you can read it. It's simple to understand. You can do it on your own even. And that should be out by fall-ish time. I'm making great progress on that rewrite. So,
but you don't have to wait till fall either. If you are hungry right now, there are ways to jump into this program and get into this today. If from another thing my sponsor taught me, strike when the iron is hot.
Well,
So
I
if
didn't
you're
want to
listening
say
to
it because I don't want to be accused of self-promotion. But
well, send us an email. We will point you there.
There you go. That's a good idea. Send it to Dan. I am one too also, and he will show you the book that's already out there.
Yep, and point you to where you can go and have these support meetings.
Because I really am sincere, folks. This is not about us having fame, glory, or money. We're not doing this. We're doing this out of the love of our heart to help the new guy down the line. And there's too many people dying out there who are not getting any of this information. So anything you can do to help us join on board with that mission, that is what we want to do here. So, great podcast as always. Wonderful. Thank you for the questions, everyone. Hope they were helpful. Again, we can't really fix on you on an internet show, but we can certainly offer our experience, strength, and hope and point you in the right direction. And if you want to send us a follow-up letter on your journey, let us know how things are going. We'll read that too. So, stay with us. We got lots more in store in the future. Thanks for being here. Write to us, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. And we're going to end as we usually do with every episode with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Just for today. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. You die if you don't. Now, I do that with my patients, and they're all like, what's that? It's like, it's about not taking yourself so seriously. Try a little woohoo in your life. And all of them go from not doing it at the beginning, and then they all do it at the end, and I can see the growth in them. So that's why we do it that way. Thanks for being with us. We love you. Come back and see us. We'll still be here, and have a great week. Bye-bye.